Athens, October 1920. A young king walks his dog through the private gardens of a royal estate. Within 3 weeks, he will be dead. Not from war, not from an assassin's bullet, from the bite of a monkey. He is 27 years old. He rules a country that does not trust him, sits on a throne he never wanted, and married a woman his own family refused to accept. In a few days, none of that will matter. What will matter is a wound on his leg that nobody takes seriously enough, soon enough. This is the story of how a king dies from something almost too small to notice, and how his death quietly rearranges the fate of an entire nation. By the end of this story, you'll understand how a walk with a dog turned into one of the strangest deaths in royal history, why the doctors around him hesitated at the exact moment that mattered most, and how a bite from an animal ended up costing hundreds of thousands of human lives in a war he never lived to see. To understand why Alexander was even in that garden alone, you have to understand the throne he sat on. He was the second son of King Constantine I of Greece. Second sons are rarely meant to rule, and Alexander wasn't raised to. His older brother, George, was the one groomed for the crown. Alexander grew up in his shadow, with more interest in cars and machines than in politics. But Greece in the 1910s was a country tearing itself in two. On one side stood Constantine, who wanted Greece to stay neutral in the First World War. On the other stood Eleftherios Venizelos, the country's powerful prime minister, who wanted Greece to fight alongside Britain, France, and Russia. The disagreement split the nation, a rift so deep it became known as the National Schism. The Allied powers backed Venizelos. In 1917, they forced Constantine into exile. His heir George was seen as too sympathetic to Germany to be trusted with a throne either. So the Allies looked past both of them. To the second son, nobody had prepared for this. Alexander, 23 years old, was crowned King of the Hellenes. He had the title. He didn't have the power. Venizelos ran the country. Alexander was, in practical terms, a monarch under supervision, cut off from his own exiled family, watched by the government that had installed him, a king confined largely to the palace grounds. In that isolation, he found one relationship that was entirely his own. Aspasiamanos was the daughter of one of his father's aides, not royal, not approved of, not someone a king of Greece was supposed to marry. In 1919, he married her anyway, in secret. Greek society was scandalized. The church initially refused to recognize the union. Aspasia, caught in the backlash, fled to Paris while the gossip settled. By October 1920, Alexander was back in Athens, largely alone, walking the grounds of the royal estate at Tatoi with his dog. That ordinary routine is where everything changes. October 2nd, 1920. Alexander is walking through the gardens when his dog gets into a fight with a Barbary macaque kept on the grounds. Alexander does what most people would do. He steps in to pull the animals apart. That instinct is what gets him bitten. As he separates his dog from the first monkey, a second macaque joins the fight and bites him on the leg and torso before the animals scatter. The wounds are cleaned. They are not treated as serious, not by Alexander, and not critically by the people around him. He doesn't want word of the incident to spread. He downplays it. This is the first link in the chain. A king who doesn't want to look weak, choosing silence over urgency. By that same evening, the bites have become inflamed. Over the following days, the infection spreads. What started as 2 puncture wounds becomes a systemic infection, the beginning of sepsis, the body's own immune response turning against itself. The medical reality is stark, and this is where the story slows down. Amputating the infected leg is discussed as the one intervention that might save him, but no one is willing to make that call. Alexander is the king of Greece. Cutting off a monarch's limb is not a decision any doctor wants attached to his name, not without approval from a family that is by law in exile and barred from returning to the country. So the doctors wait. The infection does not. Alexander's condition deteriorates for over 3 weeks. His fever climbs, his breathing becomes labored. Reports at the time describe his heartbeat weakening day by day, his doctors eventually concluding there is nothing left to be done. He is largely alone through this decline, his estranged family forbidden from the country, his wife still displaced by the same scandal that shaped his entire reign. On October 25, 1920, 23 days after the bite, King Alexander of Greece dies. He is 27 years old. He has been king for a little over 3 years. None of his family is at his side when it happens. What actually killed him wasn't the monkey. It was what came after. An untreated infection allowed to progress unchecked in an era before antibiotics existed, compounded by a political situation so precarious that a routine medical decision, amputation, became something no one dared to make. Penicillin was still 8 years from discovery. Sepsis in 1920 was frequently a death sentence once it reached this stage, regardless of who the patient was. A king's title didn't protect him from that biology. If anything, his position may have worked against him. The same royal status that made his doctors hesitate on amputation was the reason his own family couldn't reach his bedside in his final weeks. Alexander's death didn't just end a life. It reopened a political crisis that had never actually been resolved. With the throne empty and no immediate, uncontested heir acceptable to the current government, Greece held a referendum. The vote brought back the man the Allies had forced out 3 years earlier. Constantine Vimes, Alexander's own father, returned from exile to reclaim the crown his son had briefly held in his place. Constantine's return reversed Greece's alliances at the worst possible moment. The country was in the middle of the Greco-Turkish War, fighting to expand its territory into Asia Minor with the backing of Britain and France. Those allies had backed Venizelos, not Constantine. With Constantine back on the throne, that support evaporated. Greece fought on largely alone, and the campaign that followed ended in catastrophic defeat, a military and humanitarian disaster that reshaped the region and displaced over 1 million people. Winston Churchill, reflecting on how directly one small event had reshaped the outcome, put it simply, 250,000 persons died of this monkey's bite. That's not a metaphor. It's a fairly literal chain of cause and effect. A wound in a garden, an infection nobody amputated in time, a vacant throne, a reversed alliance, and a war lost as a result. There's something almost unbearable about how ordinary the moment was. A man walking his dog. An instinct to step between two fighting animals. The kind of thing almost anyone would do without thinking twice. Alexander didn't die in battle, or in a palace intrigue, or from any of the dangers that come with wearing a crown. He died from hesitation, his own, in not taking the wound seriously, and his doctors, in not acting when it still might have mattered. And because of who he was, that hesitation didn't stay contained to one hospital room. It rippled outward into a referendum, an alliance, a war, and ultimately into the lives of 250,000 people who never met him and never fought that monkey's bite themselves. 5 months after his death, his wife Aspasia gave birth to their daughter, a child who would grow up never knowing her father, born into a story that had already, tragically, run its course. Sometimes history doesn't turn on grand decisions. Sometimes it turns on a garden, a dog, and 23 days nobody thought to take seriously enough. If stories like this fascinate you, hit subscribe. There's a lot more history where this came from.